The leading thinking about race online has been organized along either theories of racial formation or theories of hierarchical and structural white supremacy. Scholars who study race point to the aggressive economic and social policies in the U.S. that have been organized around ideological conceptions of race as an effort to reorganize and redistribute resources along particular racial lines. Vilna Bashi Treitler, a professor of sociology and chair of the Department of Black Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, has written extensively about the processes of racialization that occur among ethnic groups in the United States, all of which are structured through a racial hierarchy that maintains whiteness at the top of the social, political, and economic order. For Treitler, theories of racial formation are less salient. It does not matter whether one believes in race or not, because it is a governing paradigm that structures social logics. Race, then, is a hierarchical system of privilege and power that is meted out to people on the basis of perceived phenotype and heritage, and ethnic groups work within the already existent racial hierarchy to achieve more power, often at the expense of other ethnic groups. In Treitler's careful study of racialization, she notes that the racial binary of white versus black is the system within which race has been codified through legislation and economic and public policy, which are designed to benefit white Americans. It is this system of affording more or less privileges to ethnic groups, including white Americans, as the penultimate beneficiaries of power and privilege that constitutes race. Ethnic groups are then racialized in the hierarchical system and vie for power within it. Treitler explains the social construction of race and the processes of racialization this way. Racial identities are obtained not because one is unaware of the choice of ethnic labels with which to call oneself, but because one is not allowed to be without a race in a racialized society. Race is a socio-cultural hierarchy, and racial categories are social space or positions that are carved out of that racial hierarchy. The study of racial categories is important because categories change labels and meanings, and we may monitor changes in the racial hierarchy by monitoring changes in the meaning and the manifestations of racial categories. Treitler's work is essential to understanding that the reproduction of racial hierarchies of power online are manifestations of the same kind of power systems that we are attempting to dismantle and intervene in, namely eliminating discrimination and racism as fundamental organizing logics in our society. Tanya Golash-Boza, chair of sociology at the University of California, Merst argues that critical race scholarship should expand the boundaries of simply marking where racialization and injustice occur, but also must press the boundaries of public policy so that the understanding of the complex ways that marginalization is maintained can substantially shift. Michael Olney and Howard Winand, two key scholars of race in the United States, distinguish the ways that racial rule has moved from dictatorship to democracy as a means of masking domination over racialized groups in the United States. In the context of the web, we see the absolving of workplace practice, such as the low level of employment of African Americans in Silicon Valley, and the product that stem from it, such as algorithms that organize information for the public, not as matters of domination that persist in these realms, but as democratic and a fair project, many of which mask the racism at play. Certainly, we cannot intervene if we cannot see or acknowledge these types of discriminatory practice. To help the reader see these practice, I offer here more example of racial algorithmic oppression works in Google search. On June 6, 2016, Kabir Ali, an African-American teenager from Clover High School in Midlothian, Virginia, tweeting under the handle @IBKabir, posted a video to Twitter of his Google image search on the keywords 3 black teenagers. The results that Google offered were of African-American teenagers' mugshots, insinuating that the image of black teens is that of criminality. Next, he changed one word, black, to white, with very different results. 3 white teenagers were represented as wholesome and all-American. The video went viral within 48 hours, and Jessica Guyon from USA Today contacted me about the story. In typical fashion, Google reported these search results as an anomaly beyond its control, to which I respond again, if Google isn't responsible for its algorithm, then who is? One of Ali's Twitter followers later posted a tweak to the algorithm made by Google on a search for 3 white teens that now include a newly introduced criminal image of a white teen and a more wholesome image of black teens. When we know about Google's response to racial stereotyping in its products, is that it typically denies responsibility or intent to harm, but then it is able to tweak or fix these aberrations or glitches in its systems. What we need to ask is why and how we get these stereotypes in the first place, and what the evident consequence of racial and gender stereotyping would do in terms of public harm for people who are the targets of such misrepresentations. Images of white Americans are persistently held up in Google's image and in its results to reinforce the superiority and mainstream acceptability of whiteness as the default good, to which all others are made invisible. There are many examples of this where users of Google search have reported online their shock or dismay at the kinds of representations that consistently occur. Some examples are shown in figures 2.14 and 2.15. Meanwhile, when users search beyond racial identities and occupations to engage concepts such as professional hairstyles, they have been matched with the kinds of images seen in figure 2.16. The unprofessional hairstyles for work image search, like the one for 3 black teenagers, went viral in 2016, with multiple media outlets covering the story, again raising the question, can algorithms be racist? Understanding technological racialization as a particular form of algorithmic oppression allows us to use it as an important framework in which to critique the discourse of the internet as a demographic landscape and to deploy alternative thinking about the practice instantiated within commercial web search. The sociologist and media studies scholar Jesse Daniels makes a similar argument in offering a key critique of those scholars who use racial formation theory as an organizing principle for thinking about race on the web, arguing that instead it would be the more potent and historically accurate to think about white supremacy as the dominant lens and a structure through which sense-making of race online can occur. In short, Daniels argues that using racial formation theory to explain phenomena related to race online has been detrimental to our ability to parse how power online maps to oppression root in the history of white dominance over people of color. Often, group identity development and recognition in the United States is guided in part by ongoing social experiments and interactions, typically organized around race, gender, education, and other social factors that are also ideological in nature. These issues are at the heart of a politics of recognition, which is an essential form of redistributive justice for marginalized groups that have been traditionally maligned, ignored, or rendered invisible by means of disinformation on the the part of the dominant culture. In this work, I am claiming that you cannot have social justice and a politics of recognition without an acknowledgement of how power often exercised simultaneously through white supremacy and sexism can skew the delivery of credible and representative information. Because Black communities live in material conditions that are structured physically and spatially in the context of a freedom struggle for recognition and a resource, the privately controlled internet portals that function as a public space for making sense of the distribution of resource, including identity-based information, have to be interrogated thoroughly. In general, search engine users are doing simple search consisting of one or more natural language terms submitted to Google. They typically do not conduct search in a broad or deep manner, but rather with a few keywords, nor are they often looking past the first page or so of search engine results as a general rule. Search results as artifact have symbolic and material meaning. This is true for Google, but I will revisit this idea in the conclusion in an interview with a small business owner who uses the social network Yelp for her business and also finds herself forced from view by the algorithm. Search algorithms also function within the context of education. They are embedded in school, libraries, and educational support technologies. They function in relationship to popular culture expressions such as just Google it, which serves to legitimate the information and the representation that are returned. Search algorithm functions as an artifact of culture akin to the ways that Cameron McCarthy describes informal and formal educational constructs. By emphasizing the relationality of school knowledge, one also raises the question of the ideological representation of dominant and subordinate groups in education and in the popular culture. By representation, I refer not only to mimesis, or the presence or absence of images of minorities and the third world people in textbooks. I refer also to the question of power that resides in the specific arrangement and the deployment of subjectivity in the artifact of the formal and informal culture. The internet is an artifact then both as an extension of the formal educational process and as informal culture, and thus it is a deployment of subjectivity. This idea offers another vantage point from which to understand the ways that representation and misrepresentation in media are an expression of power relations. In the case of search engine results, McCarthy's analysis opens up a new way of thinking about the ways in which ideology plays a role in positioning the subjectivities of communities in dominant and subordinate ways. This concept of informal culture embodied in media representations of popular stereotypes, of which search is an instance, is also taken up by the media scholars Jessica Davis and Oscar Gandy Jr., who note, media representations of people of color, particularly African Americans, have been implicated in historical and contemporary racial project. Such project use stereotypic images to influence the redistribution of resource in ways that benefit dominant groups at the expense of others. However, such projects are often typified by substantial tension between control and its opposition. Racial identity becomes salient when African American audiences oppose what they see and hear from an ideological position as harmful, unpleasant, or distasteful media representation. These tensions underscore the important dimensions of how search engines are used as a hegemonic device at the expense of some and to the benefit of dominant groups. The results of searches on Jew, as we have already seen, are a window into this phenomenon and mark only the beginning of an important series of inquiries that need to be made about how dominant groups are able to classify and organize the representation of others, all the while utilizing and naturalizing the agency behind such representations. My hope is that this work will increase the saliency of African American women and other women of color who want to oppose the ways in which they are collectively represented. Google Google's enviable position as the monopoly leader in the provision of information has allowed its organization of information and customization to be driven by its economic imperatives and has influenced broad a swath of society to see it as the creator and a keeper of information culture online, which I am arguing is another form of American imperialism that manifests itself as a gatekeeper on the web. I make this claim on the basis of the previously detailed research of Elad Segev on the political economy of Google. The resistance to efforts by Google for furthering the international digital divide are partially predicated on the English language and American values exported through its products to other nation-states, including the Google Book Project and the Google Search. Google's international position, with over 770 million unique visitors across all of its properties, including YouTube, encompasses approximately half of the world's internet users. Undoubtedly, Google Alphabet is a broker of cultural imperialism that is arguably the most powerful expression of media dominance on the web we have yet to see. It is time for the monopoly to be broken apart and for public search alternatives to be created.